What did you make of what he said last night? I mean, one of the lines he came out with was that President Joe Biden is an enemy of the state.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure that this back and forth, almost violent rhetoric between Biden and Trump is helpful. But I think, President Trump can't help himself. I was hoping he wouldn't fall into the trap or take the bait from Biden. Clearly the Democrats want to make the midterm elections about Trump and get President Trump back on the front page. They think that will work, and it might. I think it might count for a few points in November. Kind of refocusing the voters away from the problems in America, away from the self-inflicted wounds from the Biden administration, and refocus on President Trump. So it might work, but I thought Biden's speech on Thursday night was so outrageous that President Trump really had no choice but to respond. And it's his nature anyway, as you know. He can't. Sometimes he's his own worst enemy. But I thought last night was a campaign rally right out of the style of 2016, as you pointed out. And does he call people names? Does he say Biden's the enemy of the state? I think a lot of people would agree with that sentiment. It's not polite to say it, but that's classic Trump, to say the things that people are thinking, while most presidents would have a filter on that. But again, he's saying things that a lot of people think anyway. So,
do you think there is an appetite in the US for more Donald Trump?
I think there is. I think the question is there enough? And there is definitely some sentiment that that there's some Trump fatigue. I think people would prefer a Ron DeSantis. Many Republicans would prefer a Ron DeSantis, Kristi Noem, Nikki Haley, Tom Cotton, Mike Pompeo, people that support the president's policies, candidates that support the philosophy of Trump and the Tea Party and kind of the new Republican Party, but without some of the baggage of President Trump and with a little bit more filter than President Trump. But the question is, if he runs, I think he's got enough support to win the primaries. At least that's what the polls say. Prior to the raid, Trump was only up 9 points over Ron DeSantis. It was 45-36, I believe. Not much, and it had narrowed gradually over the last 6 or 12 months. After the raid, Trump bumped up to plus 38. So I think if the Democrats' intentions were to help the president get back onto the front page, that surely worked. If their idea was to not have him run for president, that was a complete failure.
Explain to people who are looking at this story from the UK, from a UK perspective, and they're seeing that there are raids by the FBI in Mar-a-Lago. They are seizing many, many documents, hundreds of documents, some top secret, some classified. The rules are very clear. When you're president of the United States, you leave the documents behind. You can't take them away as little keepsakes, which is potentially what he did. And yet there's outrage amongst Trump supporters that he's being set up. That just doesn't compute for many people over here.
Well, a couple of things. One is, it's not just Trump supporters that are outraged. And I think what's important to keep in mind is it's not an obvious rule or etched in stone that the rules are not clear. Every president.
Oh, come on. It's clear you can't take top secret documents away.
Clearly you can, Chloe. Clearly you can, and other presidents do it. By the way, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton had thousands of those top secret documents on a server, an illegal server in her home. Now, I don't care about that, but I think the UK listeners, I would hope they have some compassion or understanding that people in America, not just Trump supporters, but voters in general, but yes, especially Republicans, have been told for 4 years or 6 years that they're racists or they're fascists if they had any concerns about the Hillary Clinton server and the Russia collusion hoax. And then it turns out a few years later, they were right. At the time, even I suspected that they were wrong, that they were overdoing it on Hillary, and that maybe the Trump campaign was colluding with the Russians. I mean, you start to believe it when that's all you hear. As it turns out, the Russia collusion not only was it a hoax, but it was created by the Hillary Clinton campaign, who had illegal documents on her server. So,
Okay, they weren't
look,
illegal documents on her server. She used a different email address, which she shouldn't have done, which wasn't secure, and she held her
no,
hands up to that.
well, they found classified documents on her server
But
that were
but some people would
vulnerable to
argue.
foreign. Yeah.
But
So
some
look,
people would argue that there is a difference between that on a computer cloud, on a server, compared to taking it to your golf resort in Mar-a-Lago, where lots of people are walking through and you can physically grab them.
Too. Yes, I would argue that the server was much more dangerous and much more vulnerable. But also, every president does this. It's all worked out, not even through subpoenas. It's actually worked out through the GSA, the Government Services Administration in Washington, who packs those things, who actually pack the boxes. The Trump didn't pack them in a briefcase and sneak them out in the middle of the night. So I just think it would be helpful to have a little perspective for the UK audience, and have some compassion for people who have been just recently told by Mark Zuckerberg himself that the White House and the FBI were actively pressuring the tech companies to collude with the White House and with the FBI on information like the Hunter Biden laptop, which even the New York Times and Washington Post finally admitted was valid. So I don't bring these points up to say, whataboutism or he said, she said. It's just to have some understanding that the voters have been, really had this stuff jammed down their throat. And then they see the raid, then they see student loan forgiveness, which is really a transfer, to taxpayers. These things are done without the constitutional norms. The forgiveness of $1.5 trillion to $1 trillion in student loans, that goes on to the taxpayer. The average taxpayer will pay $6,000 for these people to have their loans forgiven. That was done without congressional consent or assent. That's against the Constitution. The unprecedented use of executive orders is not exactly constitutional or consistent with traditional norms. So they're being told that they're fascists and that they're a threat to democracy, when in fact this current administration is acting undemocratically and against constitutional norms. So, really, who's the threat to democracy? So, I think there needs to be some perspective that many of these voters are being told they're a threat to democracy, and it's quite the opposite, that the current White House is actually a threat to democracy by the way
That's your view, clearly. And we appreciate you coming on to speak to us. That is Greg Swanson, who is from Republicans Overseas. Thank you so much for your time. Worth saying, a 3-year State Department investigation concluded back in September 2019 that 38 individuals were culpable in 91 instances of sending classified information that reached Clinton's email account, though it found no persuasive evidence of systemic, deliberate mishandling of classified information. Just to set the record straight. But interesting perspective. And I think it gives us a really important insight into how entrenched these views are. Because I put forward the view of the UK here. For some people, it's head-scratching time. Hang on a minute. There's classified top-secret documents that are clearly marked in that manner. Yeah. In his golf resort in Florida, is it not reasonable that the FBI want to get hold of them? And from Greg Swanson's point of view, well, no, all presidents do this. I think that's a sweeping generalisation that we'll need to check out. But an interesting how entrenched people are in their views. Yeah, absolutely. And also notable, as we've reflected already, how much this is just a repeat of 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. It just feels like it's the same argument. Hillary Clinton's emails coming up again. And the interesting point, as we heard from a reporter earlier on, is that lots of Republicans will be too frightened to stand against Trump. And we heard there from Greg, he'd rather have someone else stand. But if Trump is going to stand, well, okay, we'll get behind him. So it's almost like a default. Yeah, it is absolutely. I love US politics. Absolutely fascinating.